Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to AVX Live. I'm Joe Gilderson, President of Corporate Audio Visual Services. And once again, I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Ryan Finch.
Woohoo! I'm on the left now. This is new. Look at that.
That is amazing stuff,
I feel
Ryan.
powerful. Damn.
But you're no longer on the left.
Easy come, easy go.
We've missed you guys for the last couple of weeks. We've been a little occupied.
Ocupado.
We've been ocupado. We've been running around, doing some shows, having some fun, seeing some things, meeting some people. I'm just saying.
All the above.
We've been doing some stuff. So we're back this week. We're excited to be back. And we're going to talk about one of the most common things that we actually do for all of your events. And that's projection. But before we get there, Ryan, we're going to see if you remember. Can you tell people how they can find us?
I absolutely can. You can find us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube Live. You can do that every Wednesday, specifically at 1 p.m. While you're there, you should drop us a comment. You should be part of the show. If you ask a question, we will answer it live. That's like half the reason of doing it live, people. Come on. Ooh. And, of course, you should like, comment, share, subscribe, all the above. Super appreciated. And, of course, if you've missed a previous episode or would like to return and watch the rest of this one, you can find that on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/corporate-AV. And, lastly, you can find some bite-sized pieces chopped up on Facebook, Instagram, and on LinkedIn as well for some highlights, video bites.
It was pretty good. It was pretty good, Ryan. I mean,
boom.
I thought you were going to be out of practice, but no.
Mid-season form. I came out of the gate humming, kind of like the New York Rangers.
You mean the Boston Celtics, yes. 3-0. That's all I'm saying. Anyways, let's get
hang the banner. Go ahead. Hang it from the
I'm ready to put
3 games
up there right now. I'm totally ready. But listen, let's get this party started.
Cool.
Now, the key here, Ryan, is can I control you and all of your passion and emotion and excitement to keep to our timeline? That's going to be today's challenge.
The main thing here is Joe has not sent me a script for this, and he knows that I'm just going to have to follow along. So good luck.
We're running off the rails, everyone. Now, all right. So today we're talking about projection. And, we're going to talk do's and don'ts. So projection's one of the core items in anything AV related. Usually it's the largest thing in the room, right? Big giant screen, maybe there's 2, maybe there's 20. But those giant video screens are really designed for everyone to see the video, the presentation, maybe the larger than life camera image. Can you imagine Ryan's head blown up even bigger?
Like this, only bigger.
Wow, that was impressive.
I know. Look at that.
But in almost every boardroom, classroom, auditorium, any event space, there's some sort of projection screen. The fact that it's so very common makes it probably very misunderstood. And, I don't think people really know what goes into it. So we're going to cover some things. And Ryan, I think we're going to start maybe with our big 3. What do you think about that?
I think that makes sense. So what are the big 3? Well, for us, anytime, we go into a decision-making mode, right? Do we do projection or not? Or do we do something else? We're usually considering 3 key factors. And we definitely talked about it on this show before, but just in case you missed that, the 3 factors are, number 1 is space. Because you need a lot of space, not just the space physical for the screen, but also the physical space for the projector and the espacio entre, in between. Look at that. That's pretty good. You didn't. What are you talking about? That wasn't good. That was exactly the word.
Let's keep going.
Anyway, so the space between. Anyway, the space between the projector and the screen obviously counts as space that we need. So you need a lot of space. That's number 1. Number 2, you need an environment that does not have a huge amount of bright light, like the sun. The sun is usually the one that gets us in trouble, right? Or I shouldn't say gets us in trouble, will really kill the idea of projection altogether. Like if you have an outdoor event during the daytime and you ask for a projection, we are going to say No, because that is not a good idea, because the sun always wins. You're not going to have a projector that is stronger than the sun. Of course, if you're putting that projection screen right next to a gigantic window with sun coming in, that won't work well either. Some kind of fluorescent overhead lights, especially when they're shining directly on the screen surface, that also kind of impacts it. Maybe we get those individual lights turned off. But that's number 2. So we got space, we got light, and the third one is content. And why do I say that? Well, the alternatives would be maybe a TV screen, which is typically significantly smaller. And if you have a lot of fine detail, right, things that are, maps, charts, figures, line graphs, things like that, we need to be able to blow those up big enough so that everyone can see it. Otherwise, it's just vague pictures of things on screens.
We call it shapes and shadows.
Shadows. There you go. So obviously, if your content is very fine and detailed, and we need to get that as big as possible, then the most efficient way to do that is projection. That might mean that it is the best route. Obviously, LED, we can go much bigger as well. But of course, there's some other things like pixel pitch and how close you can get to the screen. And we're not going to really talk about those things today. But it does play into the decision of choosing projection versus, say, TV monitors. So those are the big 3: space, light, content. Book it. There it is.
Wow. Listen, I wanted to go on record right now as saying that my clients have fine content.
Okay.
Well, you said
I don't know
if
what that
they
means.
have good content. I mean, my clients.
No, I don't mean. Oh, you mean?
Exceptional
Oh, I see.
content.
Yes, I'm talking
Okay.
about fine detail. Fine meaning small, very
Pequeño.
small.
Yeah.
Pequeño.
Okay, this is good.
We'll do this whole show in Spanish. I've been practicing.
Estoy listo. Vamos. Okay, so this, it's funny because space. I think that's always where we end up starting, like physical, right? There's some sort of physical limitation that we have to work with,
Right.
and I tend to find projection to be the least flexible of our video choices, just due to the there's definitive math involved.
Right.
And it is physically big, so it has to fit in said space.
Said.
So I think that's a great way to start is our space. And you nailed it on the light. I have done shows outdoors in tents where it was for during the day. And I remember we're doing rear projection. We built out a little tent behind it. And we said, all right, turn on the 2 projectors. We have them both together. Turn them on, guys.
They're already on.
They said they're already on. We're going to have a bad day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, you just can't beat that sun. I know there's improved technology out there right now. And we're going to try to stay with kind of the more mainstream items than the extreme. There's actually now 50,000 lumen projectors. There's things that didn't exist even 5 years ago, but that's really very specific applications, and it doesn't apply to most of the people we work with. So I think we're going to stay fairly mainstream with our discussions. But Ryan, if you were going to go to the next step, do you think we should define a little bit more about projection, or should we talk about some do's and don'ts?
I mean, we could very easily get into the nitty gritty. What do you think about like a 10,000 foot view?
10,000 feet. That's it. Just let's make
10,000
it quick.
feet. Okay. You want to shoot your projector straight at the screen. You want to avoid angles, right? The more angle, the less reflective that surface becomes. Number 2 is obviously there are front or rear projection options. We can either have the projection in front of the screen, or we can put the projector behind the screen. There's different advantages and pros and cons to each. Color. Not all projectors project the same looking image. And that doesn't mean that anything looks wrong. It's just about how things look when they're together. So usually you want to stick with the same type of projector all the way through. Last but not, well, I shouldn't say last but not least. I have to make this analogy. Lumens. How many lumens does it have?
Ooh.
In 10 seconds or less, it's how strong the projector is. I think it was Jim Marlowe from our team. You used the buttered bread, right? If you have a little bit of butter and you slab it over your bread, okay, great. What happens if you have the same amount of butter and you have twice as much bread? Well, you have a little less butter to grow across the whole surface and you have a less buttery bread. That's the same kind of thing with projected light. The bigger the screen gets, the more spread out and dispersed the projected image gets, the dimmer, softer it looks. So lumens is a kind of a measure of the brightness, so to speak. And so that analogy just kind of helps you understand is the bigger it gets, the more power we need to make it bright. And then lastly, Joe mentioned math. There are a fair amount of calculations involved when we go to determine what kind of lens we need to fill the screen, because you don't want the screen to be filled this much or to be stretching over so that you see the projected image on the walls. We don't want that. We want it to fit perfectly. And to fit perfectly, we need the right lens. So we do some math, #math, and that tells us exactly what kind of lens we need. So there you go. There's your 10,000 foot view. And that will start to come into play once we start talking about the do's and don'ts.
Very good. #math. I think many of you have seen us on site with the lasers, and we're
Laser
taking
beams.
measurements because math is definitely a part of it, and we're doing hypotenuses and
No, we're not.
hippopotamus.
No. What's a hypotenuse?
We're not going to get into that.
He backed himself into a corner. I knew it.
We're not going to get into that right now.
All right, fine.
I thought we were talking about hippopotamuses. Either way, listen, we need to know that screen's going to fit, and it's going to fit exactly where we put it. Because as many of you know, even in your own home, you may have a different height in a different place. And hotel ballrooms and convention centers and country clubs and other meeting spaces are very well known for having different heights and different spaces. And usually those screens are going in a space that is not what they tell you on the website. Most of the time, those websites are not accurate to begin with.
Right.
But that's our job, and that's why we try to promote these things. And we go through and we do that #math.
Boom.
Figure out how we're going to make this work. So, Ryan, let's start with some do's, and then I think we can probably reflect some more on those angles and colors and light.
I see what you did there.
See
All
what I
right.
did
Well,
there?
where do we start? Because you're the one with the master script here that you never sent me. So I'm just winging it.
I'm happy to start.
Go ahead.
All right, let's start. If you had an ideal situation and we could put that projector wherever you wanted, where would you put it?
I think I'd put it in the back of the room, up high over the tops of people's heads. Is that the right answer?
I mean, it can be.
Well, I mean, in fairness, I'd probably pick rear projection first, but we're going to get to that. So yeah, for in terms of where we put the projector, that obviously one of the big decisions. In the back of the room, over the tops of people's heads, makes a lot of sense. And the reason is you have more space on the floor for, say, tables. People don't bump into it. People don't have to walk in front of the projected image, and you get all the shadows on the screen. It's generally a more polished look than having, what we'd call like conference style, is the projectors on like cocktail tables up at the front of the room. And yeah, it just kind of helps keep things out of the way, no shadows, secure, big base on it, so it's not toppling over, and people don't tend to bump into things that are against the wall as easy as they do as things that are in the middle of the room. So that would be my starting point.
I think that's a good starting point. And
So
because
too.
many of the events that we're involved in are conferences and dinners, I think fitting those people becomes the priority. That's pretty
right.
important. Of course, you mentioned rear projection as being a desirable situation. I think we'll come back to that one. But
Okay.
In many cases, again, it goes right back to what we were talking about in the very beginning about space, light, and content, and it requires space. So if we have the space, I think you're right. That's probably the first choice. But back of the room certainly works out if it's high enough to get over people's heads. All right. So if we had to go to our next step, we're shooting this thing over someone's head so that it's a do. What's the next do in our situation for people?
Well, the next do is make sure that the bottom of the screen is high enough off the ground so that it can indeed get over the tops of people's heads. Exhibit A. So this is a pretty good example because it is front projection, right? So we are projecting onto the front surface of this wall instead of a screen. In this case, it was a wall. That actually gave us some advantages so that we can shrink the size of the screen to fit whatever dimensions we want to. And in this case, it was shrink it until we have enough space underneath it. And the idea is if this image, I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen. I don't think you can. But if this image had a whole bunch of shadowy heads lining along the bottom of the image, that's all anyone would look at is the people shifting in their seat and the shadows playing, blocking out important figures and facts. Inevitably, the most important thing on the image will be where somebody's head is, guaranteed. And so that is why we have to make sure that we keep enough space underneath the projected image. And here's a look from the back of the room. The projectors are tucked behind the screen on the far left and far right side. And so obviously you see how far the seats go up towards the front, and we have to get all the way over the tops of their heads. So making sure the bottom of your screen is far enough off the floor is also something to consider when we talk about space.
Well, that's a pretty good point. That screen being off the floor is a key factor. And what do you need to know? You need to know if they're seated, how they're seated, are they standing? Those are different variables, and many times we have the screens are at the front of the room towards where the stage is. Some of the spaces we work in, they may have bars over there and people are standing near there. And that is a challenge because again, you're limited by the height. And so the space and the light, all those factors come right back to play every single time. So I'll tell you, most of the time that I'm projecting for some sort of dinner or conference, if I have that space, I'm usually 5 to 6 feet off the ground, just for that very reason.
Right. But
it does shrink the screen in certain cases, no question about it.
Absolutely.
Good point. It's a real good point. All right, let's get to the next do. What do you got there, Finch Face?
Okay, well, let's talk about rear projection. We alluded to this earlier, but there are times when rear projection makes the most sense, like when you want to have it directly behind the stage. For the same reasons that we talked about earlier, right? Like shadows, people standing in front of it. If they are up on stage, you can't project into their faces. That would be terrible. So if we want a screen directly behind the stage, then the single best option is rear projection. Here's another example of rear projection as a screen behind the stage. Here's also another example of rear projection. And in this case, it's because it is the cleanest look and the best use of space in this scenario. We're going to quickly jump to an overhead view. So this was option one, so to speak, is when we were going to do front projection for this exact same event. And this all worked fine, but they had some changes. They wanted to add some more tables. They were going to open up the wall. But then it was kind of this strange space where we wanted to make sure, all right, the room is now much bigger, but we don't want it to look empty. And so the answer was, okay, well, let's create our own wall and put everything behind it. This also doubled as storage space. In some examples, we can actually put some of our tech position behind the stage wall here. And again, just kind of a better use of space in most cases, but naturally the space being the main term there, we need a lot of space. You can see very, very closely here, there's about 15 feet that we're eating up from the wall to the stage wall. Then you have your stage and the confidence monitor and all the seating after that. So obviously a pretty significant amount of space eaten up for this, but in this case, again, it did give us kind of an expandable or contractible wall that we could work with and, made for a nice aesthetic, and we can hide a whole bunch of things behind the set.
Like us.
In a lot
of occasions, we're behind there.
Now take a look at this. So here we are, right? We want to shoot straight on. And so the projector's up nice and close. It's raised up off the ground. We're putting it on road cases because it doesn't really matter because nobody's going to see it. So there's a whole mess of cabling back there and, it's organized, but we're not taping it down over doorways and things like that. So you're eating up a lot of that would otherwise be out in the room, and we're taking that and putting it behind the wall.
Pretty nice.
I agree.
I like
there
it.
You have it.
I like it. Good call.
Yeah. So there you have it. So, all right. I guess moving on to the next piece is.
Hey, Ryan, can I
Yeah.
just jump in on one thing?
No.
Okay, continue.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Fine.
Thank you. I was asking for permission.
Yeah.
Upfront contract.
Now it's granted.
Yes, thank you. That's nice of you. Ever since you were in that first position on the camera screen, I feel like I have to.
I know. I got a power trip.
Yeah. One little thing with rear projection besides the space, many times there's a brightness difference because the screens are actually different. So you may see it a little brighter many times in the center, but they're little things. They're things we notice, but they are little things. And, usually the fact that you don't see anything and it looks super clean and you can have that screen in the center is much more valuable than that. But just be aware that there are minor differences.
Yeah. There you have it.
Okay. There you go.
Okay. Moving on. So the next thing on our topic, or next topic on our agenda, I should say, is chandeliers. So obviously you can see the chandelier in this image, which is just in the top right corner. And there are chandeliers spaced throughout the entire space, and we wanted to do projection from the rear. You can see the two screens closest to the stage are actually TV monitors. So the bigger ones out to the right and to the left are the projection screens. And the reason I call attention to that is because the chandeliers are in the way. So here is a floor plan where you can see the rendering is at the top. You can see how low, when we talk about actual throw distances, you can see how low those chandeliers get in the way or come down to the point where if I had a projector up at the, right exactly where it was supposed to be, where if it was shooting straight on, it would have to hit the chandelier. We'd have a whole bunch of shadows and generally not a nice looking image. And so this is another reason why we break out the laser on site. We take measurements and we plot it all out. And then we can say, okay, here we are in the back of the room. Our projectors will work as long as we put them in these positions and we shoot from a slight angle. Angle, of course, is something we're gonna talk about a little bit more. But just a slight angle, and we can avoid the chandeliers. We can fill the screen. We do our hashtag math, and then everything works out. Another example, same event, a year removed. This was kind of an unusual looking room on the right side and on the back. It's kind of like a drop ceiling that comes down to about 9.5 feet high, whereas the rest of the room is 16 feet high. And so in order to do what we wanted to do originally was projection on the left and right side of the stage, the taller part of the room, we'd have to project from the lower part of the room, which means we'd have a tough time with that. So here I plotted it out so you can see what the path of the projection would take. And while it does, it's just enough to fill a screen, right, without hitting the chandelier. And you can see that on your lower left-hand side, without hitting the chandelier and without hitting the tops of people's heads who are sitting up front in the room. The problem is when it's back against the wall, there's other chandeliers that hang lower and we would end up getting squashed by that. So maybe there's a way to find a certain angle that works and we thread the needle perfectly. But this is one of those times where we figured, you know what, let's just go with LED. And so that's what you see here and avoid that altogether. Obviously, the price point is pretty different, but this was enough of a reason to make it work. Enough challenges, enough hurdles to jump that it just made the most sense to go with the safe and secure option of LED. And it's nice and bright, looks fantastic, and it was well worth it in this scenario.
Nice, good point. These the chandeliers. We've had many cases where we have to change what we're doing due to the chandeliers, and that's one of those heights that is not on the website. No one knows it. They tend to hang lower than you probably think they do.
Right.
And when a venue redoes their ballroom, that's one of the things that gets redone. And so you have to go back and you have to check it again. And we have that exact situation at a space right now for an event we're doing in 2 weeks. And they put some new chandeliers up, which actually help us in this particular occasion, but that's not the norm, to be honest. But it's an excellent point because that does determine how we're going to do things and where you're physically going to put your stage and your screen and what kind of environment you're going to create. So good point, Mr. Finch. Do we want to talk about another don't, so we can get people going the right direction here?
Well, now we're actually shifting gears into the don't
Mm.
side because that was still a do.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
That's right.
jumped the gun.
You jumped the gun. It's okay. I'll
I
forgive you.
jumped the gun.
And I'm going to forgive you because I'm going to use you as my guinea pig in this
Oh,
next
man.
example.
Is
And
it
that
for
is
buttering your bread?
no. We
Oh,
covered that already. Try to keep
okay.
up.
All right.
This was, or this will be rather, about the difference between different types of projectors. So
Hmm.
the don't is don't mix and match your projectors. It doesn't matter if they're the same lumens or close. Different projectors will produce a very different looking image. To illustrate that point, I'm going to use Joe
Hey,
as
I
my
know that
test dummy.
guy.
That's him.
I
So
don't
look,
really
if I
like that term test dummy.
it's okay. I mean, it fits in this case. Look, Joe, you look like you just came back from the Caribbean. You have a nice
I look good.
glow.
Yeah.
You look
I
great.
like it. Yeah.
So in this case, right, if I showed you this image, you would say, yeah, this looks right.
Ryan,
Okay,
that looks
well,
right.
that looks right. Okay, well, how about this? Okay, it looks a little different, but that also looks right. Okay, how about
That's
this?
Hey.
Well,
Whoa.
it's a little, more faded than the other ones, but if I didn't show you the other ones, you would say, yeah, that looks right. Well, when you put them all next to each other, that's when
Man.
you start to see a difference. And so this is, kind of a rudimentary example of what that could mean is that nothing is wrong. It just means that they don't look the same. And when you put them up side by side in the same room, like if you have two screens flanking the stage and one looks like the far left and one looks like the far right, then you're going to go, these don't look the same. And then that is your issue. It's not that either of them are wrong. It's that they don't match. And
So
so
this
that's
is like
something to
when you're
consider.
in Best Buy or Costco or Sam's Club and there's 800 TVs all turned on the same thing.
Yeah, and they have a varying degree of brightness and contrast, and how black the blacks look, and color, tint, and whatnot. Yes, 100%. It is the same type of thing when it
Gotcha.
comes to TVs. I would say it's a little less noticeable when the screens are smaller, and so that's why in most event settings you're not putting two monitors of the same size that are different, literally butted up next to each other. But when they're huge, they don't have to be butted up next to each other for you to see them, in the same field of vision next to each other. And so that's why it just becomes a little bit more noticeable with projectors, and why we always send things out as pairs or groups of the same type of projector at each, brightness level.
So the details of what people probably don't know is there's basically three different types of projectors and how their technology works, and they all do look different. And there are also times where we literally are blending them together to make one giant image. And that is where you cannot have these three very handsome characters on the screen looking different.
That's
Good
far
point.
too many. Far too many Joes.
I mean, there's four of me right now.
I mean, look, I can. There you go.
No,
You
I
had
mean,
your
it
moment
can't
in the
be.
spotlight.
It can't be the Joe show. Let's
The Joe Show. Joe
let's just
Schmo.
let's just keep this thing going.
Okay, we'll keep going.
All
All right. So the next don't is going to be don't place your projectors at too harsh of an angle relative to the screen surface. Here is a quick example. Now, this is a good example, right? I'm not going to say that this is a problem.
That
It's
looks
just
stunning.
we had to specifically, it looks great. We had to specifically take this into our thought process as we were, deciding where to put everything. Because if you notice, the screens are actually at an angle. So they're in the corners, angled in at the audience. So, all right, what did we say before? You really want everything shooting straight on. Problem was we have all of these decorations hanging in the way. We have pillars and columns to shoot through. So here's the floor plan that looks like a tremendous mess, but I'll kind of break it down.
Oof.
The light blue on the far left and right sides, that's the projected images. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. So what you'll see is it is at an angle. It's about a 15-degree angle or so, and that is traditionally what I would say is really the maximum that you want to go. There are things that we can do in the projectors, what we call keystoning. I won't get into the fine details of it, but basically we can kind of make the image fit even when it's projected at an angle. It'll still look correct. But the further off axis you get, the further away from shooting directly onto the projection screen, the more skewed and distorted things will start to look. And then there's a point where you just can't do it anymore and it just won't look right. And so this is just kind of an example of, of when you have to take that into account. So here's another view of the same thing. You also have to understand or make sure that, we're not projecting a whole bunch of light on the screen surface at the same time. So, having the side view, front view, top view, you can kind of really map everything out and really kind of illustrate exactly what you want and what you don't want.
Bravo. While there are technologies to go off that angle, off that 15 degrees, where there's keystoning or warping, you're literally changing the images. But in general, that projector's got to be straight across from the screen. I mean, that's just the rule of thumb. And then we'll use technology to adjust. But Ryan, this looks like it took you a lot of time to get all those pretty colors on there, to be quite honest.
It did.
Yeah.
It did, but it's worth it when you have to know that something is right because you only get one shot at it.
You mentioned light on the screen. Mm-hmm. Can you go back to one of those pictures where it had a big giant room with pretty colors and one giant center screen?
One giant center screen. Was it, hang tight, this one?
Yes. So you can see below the screen, straight ahead, follow the red carpet, just follow the yellow brick road right up the line there. There is two shining bright lights, and then there's a bright area right below the screen. So that takes a lot of time to actually focus all the lights so that they're not on the screen, because then you're just hurting yourself. It's a very self-defeating process. But yet that's when you're doing something that's right behind the stage. And it's not a theater that has a very deep stage or Broadway type of theater, and in general, these stages are fairly shallow. There's 8 feet, 12 feet, maybe 16 feet. So you have to actually work to keep the light off of it. But you do have to have the people lit. So it just takes time, and that's all going to be factored into the design. And so I think your picture that showcased the light and how the beams are going to work is pretty important to make it right.
Absolutely. Well, and speaking of taking the context and the surroundings into account, there's also another thing that can sometimes get in the way for projection. Joe, do you know what that is?
I have a feeling that it's the super tall centerpieces.
You mean like this? That's exactly what I mean.
Where you usually have to take them off of the tables that the projection is going to be following the path of.
That's exactly it. So if you're planning on having these really tall, elaborate centerpieces, you need to consider, how tall they're going to be and if that's actually going to create problems. Here's one of the issues for us is we don't tend to find out about things like that until we're on site and it's too late. Because it's just, there's too many moving pieces for any event, right? That I can't know necessarily what type of, coffee pots the, caterers are making unless we're in a tent and everybody's using the same electrical power. Then maybe I might ask. But the centerpieces, the decor, these are things that you have to kind of keep on your radar to flag hey, is this going to be a problem for you? Especially if they're really tall and they're taking up all that space that we talked about earlier. So definitely something to keep in mind when you're planning the event.
Ryan, the other thing that I've certainly seen many times that also comes in usually later than we do, balloons.
Absolutely.
So
well, in case in point, we have other things hanging from the ceiling, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. In this case, that
great,
they do look great. It's just, it takes some coordination. That's all.
Yes. As long as you're communicating and, in our circles, we try to communicate with all the other vendors and partners that are involved in the programs. And that's partly why we do that, because we know that there might be some fabric hanging, there might be some custom design work, there might be balloons, the florist, we're usually trying to get a sense of what's going to happen.
Right.
But it doesn't always work out like that.
Right. Absolutely.
Very good. Very good. Well, let's wrap this thing up. I think we probably got one or two more. So
We got one
let's hit
more.
another don't.
One more. Here it comes. Now I'm gonna preface this by saying that this actually does look great. I wouldn't say this is a don't, but I will illustrate kind of what I mean. So what you can see, obviously, is we have the projection screens up at the front of the room, and they are against what did I say before? Huge sources of light, gigantic windows. Now that would typically be a don't. Now in this case, it was okay. Number one, because we weren't planning on people walking in until the sun went down, and so that was something we took into account. And number two is we used really, nice, bright projection screens. Now, again, looking at this image, you wouldn't say that something is necessarily wrong, but when you compare it to this one, you go, well, yeah, that's a lot brighter. That was kind of what, that's typically what people want, is they want it to be bright and eye-catching. And, you put all this time and effort into producing a video and auction items and, things that you really want to call attention to. And the brightness is a big factor as far as things reproducing as best as they can. And, when you compare the two, you'd go, oh yeah, it's kind of, it's a little washed out. It gets far worse than this, depending on the situation. I would say, again, this does still look pretty good, but it does illustrate one of the things that we would try to avoid is by, putting things in broad daylight or very close to big windows without any masking during a daytime type of program. The sun always wins. So there you have it. There's your final don't.
The sun always wins. That's nice.
It sounds like a catchphrase.
It does sound like a catchphrase, and I just
want
to put that one up quickly, because
the sun always wins.
I mean, it's not as good as buttering your bread, but
that one makes me a little uncomfortable, if I'm being honest.
I mean,
I don't like it.
You're the one who said it. I'm going to add one do and one don't in the same thought process.
Okay.
We didn't really cover flying or hanging projectors because we discussed that we were going to try to stay on what is the most common for us today. So I'll give you a do of flying projectors. Number one, you got to know where it's going to be located because, again, back to our good friend, #math.
Math.
That will affect everything very quickly. And the other part of that is you're going to need a second one to be there with it. And it's usually right below it so that they're the exact same, as well as the fans can breathe properly and ventilate the projection, because projection throws off, except for the most current technology, a lot of heat. And then the don't to go with that, if you are putting it up in the air.
Oh, man, I don't know if he's frozen or I'm frozen. I don't know what the don't was.
Because that would be.
Oh, wait, you're back.
I'm back. Did you get
I don't know if I froze or you froze. One of us froze. Can you just say the don't again?
The don't is don't put those projectors on the same trussing as moving lights.
That is a very good point.
Because then they will be moving all around.
Don't like that.
Image that everyone works so hard to make look great will no longer look so great.
Not anymore. Yeah, that's it.
Do's and don'ts.
Well, that's a good one. That's a good one to add right at the buzzer there.
Right at the buzzer. See, it made you wait to come back to. I'm assuming that I might have blanked out for a minute. So
I don't know. We got to check the recording. Either I'm going to be frozen and you're talking and saying it twice, or you're frozen and I'm laughing at the fact that you're frozen. I don't know what the don't was. We'll find out.
It's all good. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad you joined us for this week's episode of AVX Live. Number 97. We're coming up on 100. We've got big things planned for 100.
Grande.
Grandissimo. All right, Mr. Finch, tell everybody how they can find us.
You can find us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube Live. You can do that every Wednesday, specifically at 1 p.m. And while you're there, you should drop us a comment, be part of the show, ask your questions. You can answer it live. You should also like, share, subscribe, all the above. It is much appreciated. If you miss a previous episode or you'd like to rewatch any of the episodes, including this one, you can find it on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/corporateAV. And lastly, you can find some bite-sized pieces chopped up on our Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram channels. Thank you very much. That's all. That's all, folks.
That was impressive. Nice work. Nice work. Look, we're at 40 minutes. It's about that time. We're going to wrap this thing up. Thank you, everyone, for joining us once again. and you got to see me in 4D. Well, not really, but either way, there was 4 of me at one point in time, and that was just a whole lot of fun. Thank you, everyone. We will see you next time. Mr. Finch, I'm going to sign off first, and who knows what you're going to come up with afterwards. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao. Have fun.
I got nothing. Goodbye.